Welcome to Real Grief, Real Healing with Mindy Corporon. I am your host, Mindy. A friend of mine told me in early 2018 that she saw a vision of me with a microphone in front of me. I laughed at the time and said, "I don't see any microphones in my future." Less than a year later, I was recording my first podcast on this show. I'm not going to say, "I hope you enjoy this podcast." My podcast is not truly meant to be enjoyed. Real grief, real healing is just that, real and raw. I provide you an opportunity to learn and share in the grief others are experiencing, and then we share how they are healing or perhaps not. Grief changes each of us in some way. Many of my guests have been encouraged to open new businesses, start foundations, and in general, work to make the world around us a better place. Grief is universal. How we decide to move onward, seeking healing, is individual. A significant part of my healing comes through the courageous kindness actions of others. As you listen to my podcasts, you will hear how you can give and receive courageous kindness too. Together, we are better.
Welcome to Real Grief, Real Healing with Mindy Corporon, taking a deep dive into the reality of the difficulty grief brings and offering insight into the healing available to each of us. Today, episode 14, Faith is Critical, with special guest Dr. Nicole Price. And now your host, Mindy Corporon.
Hi, friends. It's Mindy Corporon. Welcome to my podcast, Real Grief, Real Healing. Thank you for joining me today. I have a guest today, and her name is Dr. Nicole Price. I call her, in a fun way, Nicole D Price. I always refer to her as Nicole D Price in my own world. So Dr. Price is a leadership development expert, and she was introduced to me via some volunteers through the Faith Always Wins Foundation and 7 Days Make a Ripple Change the World. And Nicole, Dr. Price, has executive leadership and coaching skills, professional and workplace learning and development skills, and she's definitely inspiring, and she inspires innovation with diverse teams. So we can call Nicole Price Dr. Price recently because she completed her doctorate in educational leadership and management. And prior to that, she completed a master's degree in adult education, and that was at Park University. And then she created a Bachelor of Science in chemical engineering. So Nicole worked for years and still has an engineer's brain, but worked as an engineer for many years in the industry and the corporate world. Right now, the way I met Nicole is she is the Chief Executive Officer of Lively Paradox, which I'm still learning about what it is and what they do and who Nicole is and what she does. And she's also authored 3 books that are in print and 1 manuscript. So Nicole, I don't want to keep going on. I want to bring you into, our conversation because this is about you. This is an interview that I wanted to have with you, especially after I heard some history from you. The first history I heard from you was about your mom's passing. And then as I delved a little deeper, based on your ability to share with me your manuscript, I learned more about your father too. So Nicole, thank you so much for being my friend, and welcome to Real Grief, Real Healing.
I appreciate you having me, Mindy. Thank you so much.
Good, thanks. So you're going to be what I would say on the hot seat. And rather than you facilitating, I'm kind of facilitating now. I'm excited to lead you down this path. But the reason I started this podcast is to help anyone who listens understand that all of us have different griefs. And I would like you to pick one of your griefs. Actually, I'd like you to talk about your father first, if you're okay with that, and share with us that traumatic event that happened in your life when you were a child.
Sure. So my dad died when I was 10 years old. And I'm the sixth child of seven, and I considered myself my father's favorite. And there are many people who won't make those assertions, but whenever I have an opportunity in my sessions to ask people who have siblings, do they know who their parents' favorite child is? They always seem to know. And so I don't have many issues with saying that I was my dad's favorite. He combed my hair, he took me to school, he took me to work with him, and he seemed like he understood me. I'm very different from my siblings from a personality standpoint, and even just recreational activities and what we like to do. We're not the same. And that's a challenge when you're growing up because, if I had similarities to like half of them, that would be one thing. But I literally felt like I was the only one who felt and saw the world in a certain way. And my dad seemed to understand that. And I always loved being with my dad's side of the family. Now, my mom's family lives in, still many of them live in Coahoma County, Mississippi, but my dad's family all pretty much live here in Kansas City. And he would take me with him when he would go over, and they'd have these huge family events. And so I had a really close connection with my father. And so unlike the narrative that many people have around Black dads, that just was not my lived experience. I was with my dad all the time. And it was my mother really that I didn't, I mean, not that I didn't see her, but the things that people's moms do for them when they're little, my oldest sister did for me because she was 14 years my senior. And so when I was 7, my dad had a car wreck, and it was due to him drinking and driving, and it was a horrific car accident. They didn't believe that he was going to make it, and in fact, he spent months in ICU. I don't really remember exactly how long, but over the course of the next 3 years, he had been 100% paralyzed and had gotten half of his feeling back, was about to come home, had spent years in rehab. I was super excited because if you can imagine when your when your favorite, and pick your favorite anything, is not there anymore, everything changes. Even when I think about work and that silly little Gallup question they ask you, do you have a best friend at work? I used to think that question was dumb until my best friend was going to get another job once. And then I understood why they asked that question. And just at the time when my dad was about to come back home, when we were prepping for his return, he was going to the doctor to get a pretty benign procedure done on his teeth. And the doctor gave him too much anesthesia, had also left the room. And when they came back, he had coded and he was dead. And that happened to be also on my 10th birthday.
Nicole, when I read that in your manuscript, I was weeping. Just, you do such a wonderful job explaining it now and in your words, but in the words that you used in the book, I could tell the relationship that you had with him. You did a wonderful job bringing me into the story. And then for his passing to be on your birthday, I'm curious, how how did you then, but really as an adult woman, how do you process that and reconcile that? Do you process it? Well, I'll just leave it at that. How do you process that date?
Well, I, I think it would be difficult for anyone whose parent dies on their birthday. But for me, I feel like it's a bigger deal, and it could be self-centered. I don't know. But I had never had a birthday party before my 10th birthday. And before anyone judges that, I mean, there were 7 kids. And my mom was, for 3 years of my life, nursing her husband back to health and did not miss one day visiting the hospital. And as the sixth child of 7, you do get kind of just lost in the shuffle. And it's not that my birthday wasn't celebrated, but I'd never had a party. So on this particular birthday, Mr. Joe's a man who lived in my neighborhood, had organized an entire block party for my birthday. And my mother wasn't there. She was at the hospital. But everyone on the street was celebrating me. And I'm incredibly extroverted today, but I was even more so when I was a child. So it was a full day. Everybody's excited all about me. I'd never had this kind of experience before. And I'm talking to Mr. Joe when my mother is getting out of the car, when she shows up, and she's with my Uncle Rabbit, who's her brother. And he's helping her out of the car. And it was strange to see because my mother is just not the kind of person who would, allow somebody to help her out of a car. And I could tell she was crying, which she also didn't cry very often. I think I might have seen tears maybe half a dozen times in my entire life from her. That's just not how she expressed emotion. And I knew immediately that my dad was dead. And I thought, what in the world am I going to do now? Just imagine being placed in a situation where you feel like no one understands you. And now the one person who did is gone. And my birthday since then has always been kind of a reminder of that moment, but not necessarily in a negative way anymore. In fact, I was going to have a birthday party this year. I didn't have birthday parties. That's one way that it showed up. But also, I think I just started to look at the day as more like the day I was born, as just a matter of fact, not necessarily this thing to celebrate. Because it was also the day my dad died, which is not something you would celebrate, if that makes sense.
Right. Right. No, I understand. And I know that you were his favorite. And and for that to happen, I mean, you had to have felt so cheated out of the rest of his life.
I did. And just always wonder, like, what would he think of me? How would my life be different? How would I be more connected to the side of my family for whom family is really important and who were closest to me? There are a lot of things I lost. And I'll also say that as a result of that horrible event, I also gained another dad. My mom started dating a different guy maybe 2 years later. The time is a little fuzzy when you're 12. And man, gosh, if you want to talk about a person who really embraces a blended family, I call him nine. He did. He treated me like I was his daughter. He's very, very different from my dad, but in ways that I needed. And I tell myself that while I'm never thrilled about the fact that my father died, one beautiful thing that happened as a result of it was that I got to meet Nine, and he made an indelible mark on my life. It's almost like the lotus that grows out of mud that the Buddhists talk about.
And what a beautiful gift for your mom to give you. We've seen so many stories and movies about the child who loses a parent, and then the living parent marries a horrible person and the child suffers. And so I'm just so thankful, and I'm sure you are too, that your mom found Nine and he found her, and that he was so good for you.
Yeah, and another thing that she did, which in my own life, in hindsight, I wish maybe I had done too. She never married him and they never lived together. So there was this opportunity for us to still bond as mom and daughter. And then there were two other of my siblings who were still at home. But also, I got to experience Nine in more of a mentor kind of way. You know how it is, the people you live with, you fight with. But the people who kind of show up sometimes get a lot of grace from us. And I think that was also part of it. And then later I learned that she just felt like if she were to marry, it would be when her children were grown. And I don't know if I have an opinion about that one way or another. I just do know that it was a beautiful gift. And I love that you describe it that way, because so much about who I am is a combination of both of my dads, not just one.
Right. Right. And he had to have helped you with your healing. And I know at 12 and on, you probably weren't reflecting on how you were healing, but as you look back now, how did you heal? How did you start healing then?
God gave me rams in the bushes, men who I didn't expect, like my next door neighbor, Alfred Surratt Jr., is the son of Alfred Surratt Sr., the Monarchs Negro Leagues baseball player.
Okay.
And I just didn't have that kind of person near me, at my age. And Alfie, as I affectionately called him, let me come over every day. And just being around him was kind of an escape. It was another person who understood me, who let me tell jokes and talk a whole lot and would banter back and forth, which I still love to do today, and rarely got impatient, if ever, with me. And then I think about a Sunday school teacher, Sam Harper, who allowed me to ask him questions about anything I wanted in the same way that my dad would. And it was an outlet on Sundays for me to be able to get that piece covered. And then there was Nine, who, again, was nothing like my dad, but showed me, even though I couldn't process this at the time, that there are many ways for people to show you love. It just might show up differently. And it was interesting, in those three people, I kind of saw God at work. And what might be hard for your listeners to understand is that I have always loved me some Jesus. And so even then, just sitting in the church all the time, being taught about gratitude and rams in the bushes from as early as I can remember, as much as my brain could process it, I was thinking all things work together for the good of those who love the Lord. And rightfully or wrong, that helped me to just think there's got to be something, some reason why this is happening. And I was always looking for that spark, like always looking for it. And I think because I was looking for it, I found it.
I love that. And I do not know many scripture verses. And I can't attach them. Like I'll know words, but then I won't know the number. But I know that that's Romans 8:28.
You know that one.
I know that one. And I know that one because after the murders of Reat and Dad and Terry Lamano, a friend of Reat's made bracelets, white bracelets that said, remember Reat and remember Popeye, which is what we call my dad. And it had Romans 8:28 on it. And I didn't know what Romans 8:28 was until the bracelets were made. And now when you said that, I said, oh my gosh, I know that's Romans 8:28. So Nicole, would you elaborate please on, because I don't know who's listening either, and I don't know what faith they represent. What do rams in the bushes mean to you? What does that mean?
Oh, it's a Christian reference, and it's from the story of Abraham was going to sacrifice Isaac. And right when he was on his way to make that sacrifice, he saw a ram in the bush that was made available for him to sacrifice instead of his own son. And so what it symbolizes to me is when you think that you've had to make some amazing sacrifice, God is going to surprise you with the ram in the bush, something else that is going to help you see that your sacrifice is actually not going to be as much to your personal detriment as you believe. You're going to have a ram in the bush, an alternative.
And I'm presuming, because I know a little bit about you, that presuming that you're going, to have the ram in the bush is, and looking for the ram in the bush is what you woke up every day thinking. You said before, a minute ago, you said, I woke up every day looking for, what was the good that was going to happen. And so when the rams in the bush appeared, you were looking for them.
I was looking for them. And I believe that it's not that I wasn't grieving. I was, but I grieve in moments, not days, not weeks, not months. But if I feel sad, I grieve. I grieve for my dad now, while we're on this podcast, I grieve. And then I, practice mindfulness and come back to the present and can see everything that I am about right now would not have happened if you change that experience. And I'll give it one specific example. My parents, growing up in Coahoma County, Mississippi, as children and teenagers, it's still to this day a town that is riddled with poverty, or the county is. And as such, it's a farming community, and many people still pick cotton, believe it or not, in 2020. And then you had a bunch of children around, and they were workers. That's what they were considered. And cotton season is just in direct conflict with when school years start. And so both my mother and my father didn't get the educational start that I was afforded because they were in the fields picking cotton. And so neither of them were formally educated in the kinds of ways that the data would suggest that then their daughter would get a doctorate. But Nine was formally educated. He had been in the military. And so that exposure and that experience impacted and influenced me. And that's just one of many things that are like little rams in the bushes, little ways to go, oh, that's interesting, a benefit. And I hate to say it that way, but a benefit that came out of the trauma.
Right. Right. I understand. I do. I understand that. When I met you, we were talking about how to have interfaith conversations, and you were going to facilitate an interfaith panel, and you used this word, and then I saw it again in your manuscript, and you define yourself as a permission evangelist.
Yes.
Explain to our listeners what a permission evangelist is, because I like to adopt that.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you are the kind of Christian I think I am, the person who prays about everything, I interpret my dreams, I use scripture to guide my entire life. There are people who think of that and they have a visceral reaction because maybe they've been hurt by the church or been hurt by Christians in their past. And when I get a chance to talk to those people, what I hear is their experience has been with someone who's tried to force Christianity on them without being given permission. And for me, when somebody is hurting and they want my help, or when someone is hurting and they want to know why I don't hurt in that same way, or even when someone is stuck, even professionally, and they want to know, well, gosh, Nicole, why does it look like you aren't stuck? My faith is a critical component of it. And in those moments, I feel like now I've been given permission to share with you the word according to Christ that I think might be helpful to you, and because it's been helpful to me. But I don't share unless I've been given permission. I don't just walk up to random people and say, you need to believe in Jesus. That's never been my way. And it's probably because and I talk about this in the manuscript, my first friend I really remember in school was a little girl named Kalia Eldridge. And Kalia and her family practice Islam. And she prayed 5 times a day at school. I'm pretty sure it was like 3 times for sure. And I felt the love of Jesus in Kalia. And I don't know how to explain that except for that I did. And to me, her parents were so steeped in their faith, just as my parents were. And I cannot imagine a world in which, if I were born to her parents and vice versa, that I wouldn't have been Muslim and she wouldn't have been Christian. And so that's one way that I'm quite different from other Christians, in that I think people find their way to God, regardless of, if you want to say, paths. The thing that makes the most sense to me, and the thing that's worked the most for me in my lived experience, has been Christianity. Faith is not factual. And so I don't tend to get into disagreements with people about it. It's more, I'm looking for similarities in religions and how we can meditate and pray and serve together to, look, make a ripple and change the world.
That was a great tie-in, Nicole. That was fascinating how you did that. Yeah, one of the quotes I pulled from your manuscript is, faith is not factual, faith is a belief. And the other quote I pulled is, and this is you saying these words, I feel like my job is to help Christians be more accepting of people of different faiths. And friends, I want to tell you, I didn't know this about Nicole when we met, when I called her and said, I have a vision and can you please help me? And she did. And I had no idea that she had these experiences that I didn't have, but these experiences in her life that helped. When she and I met, we were like, you're an engineer, the two lines that are crossing each other, and we met at a point.
Mm-hmm.
That's
the intersection.
The intersection. That there's got to be some other fancy engineering term for that. No?
I don't think so.
Okay. So we met.
Maybe.
Met at this intersection, and it's just, I didn't have any probably of the experiences that you had, and yet your thoughts and beliefs that I read in this manuscript were so meaningful to me. And I know, Nicole, that your mom also has passed, and that it was actually a murder. She was hit by a car. And what I would tell you right now is that I would like to reserve time for you to talk about your mom on a completely other podcast, because I think that's a completely different healing process that you had to go through. It was much later in your life.
Definitely. My mother died, 28 years later than my dad. But I will say that entire 28 years, I was grateful every day for my mother. And we were not the same people. My gosh, we could not be together for really long periods of time. But when we were together, quality time was probably more important for us. And it was a very different, in some ways, more traumatic experience, because I was an adult and I knew more about what death meant and the loss associated with it. So it was a deeper hurt in some ways.
Yes, and I want to respect that and be authentic. And in 2021, I will have you back on, and we will discuss your mom. And it's sad. I know my listeners are thinking, it's sad you have lost both parents, and you have those things. You have other griefs too. You have just certain normal life griefs that people have. I want to end on something, though, that is, to me, very positive, and I think for you, very positive. I heard you say that you love you some Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And you wrote in the book, and I am writing my own book as well, and I have written this same sentence. I don't remember when I was not a Christian. And and you wrote that, and I'm not a born again Christian. I literally was born into, a family of Christianity, and so we definitely have that in common. And I know that our spirits were supposed to meet.
Me too. I think when you called, I say this, you'll have to let me know, but it felt to me like you were very uncomfortable telling me that you had a vision. And I remember smiling, thinking, oh, girl, I deal in visions. Tell me about your vision. What is it? Let's make it happen.
You're absolutely right. I was uncomfortable because most of the people in my circle at the time, and they don't get visions and they don't deal in visions. And so sometimes they pander to me a little bit and they're like, okay. So yes, I was uncomfortable, but you wrapped me in your arms and took that vision and made it your own. And now it's become a friendship.
Absolutely. I mean, to me, one woman and God, a majority make. That's a spin on Frederick Douglass's one man and God, a majority make. It's like if God gave you a vision, and it was kind of ridiculous if on the surface, if you don't have faith. I'm like, if God gave you the vision, that means it can happen. Period. That's how I see it.
Right. And no one had said that to me before. You were the first person to say it in that way with such conviction without even knowing me. And so I thought, okay, here we go. It was great. And so we were able to create the whole interfaith panel, and we started 1 month earlier.
We started 1 month earlier, and we've touched a lot of people.
Yes. Thank you. So I'm going to wrap up this podcast. Friends, thanks so much for joining us. I will have Dr. Nicole Price on again because unfortunately she has had more grief in her life. As you listened, she lost her mother actually fairly recently, and we'll touch on that later. But I really appreciated her taking the time to spend some of her day with us and sharing a bit of her knowledge. So she just gave us some knowledge, which is very good to have. And you can find Nicole at Lively Paradox. I'll put that all in my show notes too. So Nicole, I know you are working and you took time out of your day to do your social distance working, and I appreciate it very much.
Thank you again for having me, Mindy.
Friends, thanks so much for joining me today for this podcast of Real Grief, Real Healing with Mindy Corporon. If you want to dive deeper into how you might heal yourself or a friend, please pick up a copy of my book, Healing a Shattered Soul. Published on May 3rd, 2021, you can find my memoir anywhere books are sold. You will also find me in social media channels as Mindy Corporon. Take time to help yourself heal. Accepting courageous kindness. Take time to heal another by giving courageous kindness. Together, we are better.
Real Grief, Real Healing is copyright 2021 to 2022, Mindy Corporon, all rights reserved. Our theme music is composed by Dave Croft and used with permission. This podcast is a production of 818 Studios.